Welcome to the SJ Child Show, where a little bit of knowledge can turn fear into understanding. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the SJ Child Show today. I am meeting with Jennifer House, and she is up in Canada. I love that we can meet like this because how else would I have been able to meet you and have this amazing conversation today? And thank you so much for your time and for coming. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you here today.
For sure. And thanks for having me, Sarah. So I'm a registered dietitian and mom of three, and I specialize in feeding picky eaters. And I also train healthcare professionals and work with lots of families to try and decrease those dinner time battles. Because I know that a lot of the common feeding practices that parents use, because they were raised with them and they're just kind of normal, are totally counterproductive and make dinners a fight and actually don't serve their children. Our ultimate goal is to raise kids who have a healthy relationship with food and grow up to be eating competent. So I really want to make, dinner a peaceful, fun place for everybody to be.
I love that. I think that um, I've really had to learn how to make accommodations in my family, but we'll talk about that later on in the podcast and kind of dive deeper into that. But I really want to start off with just like kind of at the beginning processes of maybe, if you're someone who's listening who is pregnant or just starting a family, let's start with the basics and how do we start a good process off from the get-go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the feeding model that I follow, no matter the age of the child, no matter whether they're picky or not, is Ellen Satter's division of responsibility in feeding. So essentially, parents have certain roles in feeding, and then the child has certain roles. And if you're able to follow your roles without letting your kid take control over those which they like to do, and if you're able to trust your child to follow their roles, which again can also be really challenging, then you'll be far more likely to raise a child who has that healthy relationship with food and will be less likely to have a lot of those really common picky eating battles.
What are some just great good examples of toddler foods to start with to start out that journey of introducing healthy foods?
Yeah, well, when we're thinking about starting solids, of course, there are different methods, purees, baby-led weaning, like finger foods. And I wrote a book called The Parent's Guide to Baby-Led Weaning. So I love, starting solids with finger foods where the child has full control. You're not spoon feeding them for a variety of reasons, including it's a very responsive method of feeding. So they get to listen to their appetite from the beginning.
Mhm.
And then as they, grow into a toddler, we kind of let them retain that role of choosing if and how much to eat rather than pressuring them to eat their vegetables, bribing them with a brownie, making them take a bite of new food. So that, whether you're starting solids, you have a toddler, you have an older child, it's really important to let the child determine how much and if to eat, which is the child's role in that division of responsibility we were talking about. And I find parents really struggle with that because we think it's our job to get our child to eat or maybe to restrict them if we think they're eating too much. It's usually one or the other. And unfortunately, both that pressure and that restriction produce the opposite effect and backfire. So, it's really important to trust that our children can listen to their own appetite.
Yeah, because there's a lot of problems that can be created through that in eating disorders and I'm sure there's so many across the board. What is possibly something parents might want to look out for when their children are really young to alert them that something might not be going on correctly in the child's diet or nutrition?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that I like to look at, and I think it's overlooked if you do have a child that's more selective in eating or a picky eater. Sometimes it's just a normal developmental stage, but sometimes there are underlying reasons why it can be tough for kids to eat. It could be low iron, which leads to low appetite. It could be difficulty breathing, like if they have enlarged tonsils, for example. They could have oral motor weaknesses. They could have sensory sensitivities. So kind of the list goes on. So if your child is struggling to eat, I think it's important to see the, appropriate healthcare provider, look at the red flags, maybe start with your doctor, right? And just let them know and see if they can direct you in the right way, whether it's to a dietitian, an airway-centric dentist or orthodontist, occupational therapist. So there is lots of support out there for kids who have feeding challenges. And I find parents want to go at it alone because they think they should be able to do this, right? But there's no shame in, getting support for that.
No, and I love that our society, I think as a whole, is really embracing that we need to reach out for support. We need to be there for one another. We can gain so much from each other's resources and value. What are maybe what's a myth that we want to debunk about maybe from past generations for our child's eating habits?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are lots, and one of them is probably that kids will never try new foods if we don't make them. So we think that, again, we have to make our kids taste the new bite of food, or we have to bribe them with candy to get them to eat it, which essentially is telling them that these vegetables are gross, and that puts dessert up on a pedestal, creating a sweet tooth perhaps for life. But really, children are naturally curious. They naturally want to try new things. So if they're in a comfortable environment without that pressure, but with repeated positive exposure to all these different foods, most children eventually, on their own free will branch out to try those new foods on their own and learn how to enjoy them. Versus the other scenario where if they were forced to try that food, often it creates a lifelong hatred for certain foods that they were forced to eat as a child.
Isn't that the truth? And I think us as an older generation can kind of relate to that because in our childhood, at least mine, it was, eat everything on your plate, eat all of the foods, even if you don't like it, like it's not a choice kind of thing. But I think that there's so many different types of diets people are doing today, and there's how do we know what's best like for our family? Do we stick to something that might be like culturally in our, bones or whatever, or do we go outside of those? What if it isn't a healthy kind of diet to do? And then, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, variety is always great. Of course, we can incorporate what we were raised on and our favorite foods or our culture's foods. Um, Parents tend to get trapped by these most common popular diets and enter that diet roller coaster. Mom this week is on a keto diet or a paleo diet or whatever it is at the moment. And unfortunately, children watch
Yeah.
that, they see that. And, we always want to keep in mind that they're watching us and we want to be role models for, a healthy relationship with food in our body. So I like to, well, I guess I would say don't encourage a specific diet. I would probably discourage that. And we want the whole family eating the same foods.
Yeah, and I agree that showing that example, I've been there in my own life where I've gone
Mhm.
through that process. And I remember one kind of just funny, silly thing that I was doing, and it was like a prep, like they had prepped all the food. So I was only eating the food on the program.
Yeah.
And, my daughter would see me like eat the little health bars and she would have them once in a while. And one day I was eating snow and she said, Mom, is that on your program? And I was just like just laughing. And here's my little one asking me if it's okay to eat snow, right? Which probably
Mhm.
for the most part is probably not full of chemicals, but otherwise, I just thought that was so endearing. But that also had a lot of health things that came out of it. And so yeah, I'm not doing that. And she was really little, but I just thought that was so endearing of her to, like you said, kids are watching,
Yeah.
they see, and it's hard to take care of yourself and take care of a family,
Mhm.
and be a good role model. So
Mhm.
it's sometimes it's really hard to take those steps. What's like a good self-help nutrition step for moms and dads, maybe grandparents that might be listening?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because it's hard to be able to trust our children and their appetite when we don't trust that in ourselves. So I think it's fantastic if the parents see that they don't have a great relationship with food themselves and they can work on that, whether it's reading an intuitive eating book, something like that, learning a little bit about mindful eating, going to see a dietitian, for example, that will benefit the entire family. And for grandparents, if they're feeding kiddos and have varying different practices, I would suggest them to look into Ellen Satter's work, right? Maybe read one of her books about the division of responsibility or take a look at her website.
Mm. And I love that idea. I don't know the book myself or anything about it, but I like the word responsibility in there because I think that it's, and not that I'm not claiming to be a responsibility expert over here, but it's an important aspect of the nutrition and of parenting in general to take responsibility for so many of your all of your actions, right? Which includes feeding yourself and feeding your family. And what kind of structure as far as like time frames do you suggest? In my family, I'll just say I am kind of like there's not a lot of time frame structure in my house. And
Mhm,
and so we just, yeah, and I'm very time frame structured. So it's kind of funny that I'm very flexible with them. But
mhm.
what do you think it is best to set your family up in the right way there?
Yeah, so in terms of the parents' responsibilities in feeding, they're what the children are offered to eat, where and when, which is what you're getting at. So the idea of having structured meals and snack times, I think, can support children, especially neurodiverse children, because they really thrive on routine and they, come to expect that. But having the kitchen open all day, what I found with my own kids happens is they're just constantly going to the pantry and snacking because they're bored, right? They just have nothing to do and they want something to do. So by having like snack time and then meal time, it gives them a chance to build up a bit of a hunger, come to the table and be hungry for the meal, as opposed to when they kind of been nibbling all day long. So I think it can actually support children in listening to their appetite when they get a chance to have some of those, hunger and fullness signals rather than snacking throughout the day, which sort of, takes a little bit of the edge off.
Yeah. And what are some healthy snacks to maybe have available for them during those
Mm.
times so that they don't, I mean, I know that my kids just head straight to the potato chips.
Mhm.
What are some other healthy snacks we can provide them? And do we put the potato chips somewhere else? Like, what do you suggest as far as like restricting things? I don't like that idea, but what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Good question. So, in terms of a healthy snack, I like to have two food groups. It's just as simple as that, right? So, instead of just crackers, add some peanut butter, add some yogurt, or add some fruit, or just ask them to choose two things for snack. Then they're getting a little more of a balance. In terms of the chips or the cookies or the sweets or some of those more forbidden foods, we might call them, I think it's great to include those as well. And, maybe not every day for every snack, but you could choose a couple snacks a week and put the plate of cookies or the bag of chips on the table with a piece of fruit or cheese or something like that. And they get to decide how much to choose to
Yeah.
eat. And if you have dessert, you can put that on the plate with the dinner. And for kids where these foods are normalized, they'll go back and forth between the cookie and their dinner and they won't crave them. Whereas if they're quite highly restricted, or you're raising a sugar-free kid or whatever it may be, unfortunately, that tends to end up in binging. And then you have the kid at the birthday that eats the whole cake because it's just so special and
Yeah.
coveted towards them. And we really want to neutralize those foods too.
Yeah. An interesting thought popped into my mind, and let's talk about so listeners across the board can understand what is the why behind all of this? Why do we need to be worried about this?
Yeah.
Like, what's our why?
Yeah. I think our why is, I mean, first of all, to decrease a lot of the struggles and battles around food. And long term, our goal is to raise children who are eating competent. So they they love food, they, take time to feed themselves. They don't have any of those disordered eating patterns that are so common in our society. So I think that is our ultimate goal. And then our short-term goal would just be to, again, like still enjoy food, but create some of those positive memories around the table rather than some more of the negative or, stressful times.
Yeah. And let's talk about some stressful times, some challenges. What are some challenges that you find families face when it comes to dinner time?
Mhm. Well, one of the common challenges is parents fairly easily fall into the trap of being a shorter to cook. So ideally, this is part of the what children are offered in the division of responsibility. Ideally, again, everybody's eating family foods, the same food, rather than the child saying, I don't want this, can I have a bowl of cereal? Or make me chicken fingers and fries. And then all of a sudden you're making like four different dinners every night. For some children, if they are extremely picky eaters and they only eat three foods or only eat purees, of course you do have to cater to that because growth is always our number one goal.
Yeah.
But for most children, they will be able to eat most of the family meals. And as long as there's one food on the table that they can comfortably eat, even if that's just buns or sliced cucumbers or rice, part of the meal that everyone's offered, then they're not going to go hungry. So you don't have to
Yeah.
make them a backup meal and they'll have another chance to eat, at their snack. So,
What about, and this will, I guess, be more personal to my case. What if you have a
mm,
child who has visual sensitivity
mm,
and physical
mhm,
sensory issues with food? How do you, I know how I have to do it,
mhm,
but how do you suggest is the best way to keep them healthy, keep them eating their three foods,
mm,
or and I love that in time. My son's 14, so we've had a long time, and there has been a lot of new foods over the years that he has tried. He
great.
doesn't eat them regularly, but he still
Mhm,
is willing to sometimes try new things. But
mhm,
what do you think is with a visual
mhm.
sensory like that, how do we help those children?
Yeah, that's a great question. And sensory wise, there are eight senses that we have, and eating is the most difficult sensory task we do because it involves all of those senses. Visual is definitely one. So, for a child or person with visual oversensitivity, essentially, they won't will they'll notice a difference in packaging, right? Or maybe they have a goldfish cracker and they won't eat it because it has its tail gone, and they consider that a whole new food. Or an apple, they'll only eat it whole. If it's sliced, it looks totally different. So to them, that's a whole new food. So it is difficult. In terms of bringing them to the table where they can be slightly more calm and maybe in more of a place where they'll be open to try new foods, we can decrease some of the visual stimulus around them. So maybe, instead of a placemat with all these different colors and activities on it, we have a plain placemat. Everybody sits in their same place. Try and reduce clutter, maybe dim the lights, things like that. So they're not kind of, overstimulated when they come to the table. And in terms of the food, yeah, it can be difficult. There are a few, I would say, feeding therapy type methods you could choose from food chaining, which is taking their favorite food and making slightly small changes in that, working towards a goal food. And with a 14-year-old, they're old enough to pick the goal food themselves. And if they're motivated to try new foods, it's great to include them. And they might, make their own food chain. You can also do food play. So Play with the Purpose is Dr. Kay Toomey's sequential oral sensory or SOS program. And it's kind of a similar idea in that we take foods that they like and then we try some more challenging foods and we just play with them. And there's 32 steps to eating. So at first we work on tolerating those foods at the table. And then we work on interacting with them, which might be like passing it to your parent or feeding it to your stuffed animal. And then maybe we smell it, right? And then maybe we touch it or walk it up our body like a car, or just kind of some fun play activities. And none of this is forced. It all has to be the child's decision to do this. But just to get them used to the different colors of food or different textures or smells or tastes. So some of those strategies can help them gradually be willing to try new foods.
I love that. Though that's just brilliant. And I think that it is such a good start for parents. And even when they're at 14, some good ideas that I might be able to talk to my son about. And we can, and like you said, I think it really is so important to be on their terms.
Mhm.
And that can be so hard for parents because some parents are going from, work to another job, or and they're in between, or they're taking other kids to soccer or whatever. It can be,
Yeah.
can be hectic. But I think really being careful and maintaining that respect and dignity for each child is so very important. Our kids eat on completely different in different ways with different accommodations. Our daughter, loves to try new things, and she has a new program she's been able to go with Big Brothers Big Sisters program and go out to different foods that we would not be able to take her to go to. And well, you know what I mean, and factually. And
Awesome.
so it's so exciting that to see them uh want to try and like have that curiosity, like you said, about those types of foods. And for our son, we have to start simpler, and it has to be, like you said, there's all of these effects with colors and burnt ends, or things that are very visually
Mhm.
and can be very sensitive. So and it's so interesting. I think that I didn't even recognize that I really needed to give the accommodations that I do until I realized that I'd been doing it for my husband for many years before. And that one thing that I knew about him right off the bat was that he did not like to see or hear other people eat. And so restaurants were really, really hard for him. And I had grown up going to restaurants. So for me, it was like, no big loss. I've been to plenty of them, kind of thing. But I set this accommodation up. And then it was easy when it came to our son to be able to say, okay, I see this correlation between food sensitivities, and I can be just as accommodating for my child as I am to this other person that I love. And again, just giving dignity to where they're at in their process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you saw that and realized that, your child needed these accommodations, because for a lot of parents, they don't realize that maybe their child has, sensory sensitivity, and they just get really stressed that their child's not eating as much as they think they should or the variety they think they should. And, they try and force them, coming from a place of love, right? Like wanting their child to be nourished. But ultimately, I think how we feed our kids is more important than what we feed them, which might sound funny coming from a dietitian.
Oh, I love
But
it.
yeah, I think it's
I
true.
think that that's just so much easier to try to get on board with, because what you feed them can be so hard and so individual and different across all spans of life around the world, right? So it would be hard to say, no, these are the exact things you need to have and you need, but I like it that you just make it open for um really a relationship with your child that is healthy around food. What is what about water? Like, what do you think about like how much water us and our kids should be drinking? And we go to a water wellness center and get our water from a water distillery, which we have loved for almost 10 years now. And so what do you think about that? What's your take on water and the water that kind of were offered?
I mean, I think it's great that water is your beverage of choice. Often for kids, they'll default to juice if they can or pop if they can. Um, And one struggle I find is common with kids is, especially if they're picky eaters, they get constipated. And I found that encouraging drinking more water is actually one of the things that is most helpful. And for kids, if it's tough for them to drink water, if they don't like it, we can do things like, add frozen fruit into it to add a little bit of color, a little bit of flavor, fun cups, fun straws, put stickers on their cups, just to kind of make it more motivating and always have it there with them so that they don't end up a little bit dehydrated, which is easy to do.
Yeah, no, it's really easy for people to do that. I agree. And we are really lucky that the water has been the probably the most yeah, the most drink liquid. I'm not even
Yeah.
sure how to say that. But yeah, it has been a really positive, I think. And my husband and I were just discussing like um knock on wood, please don't make this change. How many health emergencies have we had in our, four family of four over the past 5 to 10 years? And really, there has been zero. We haven't had health, we've had some broken bones and things that have had to go. But for overall, I think that the choices that we've made and you kind of go up and down. It's not sometimes it's not just a straight through. You eat right one day and you're great for the rest of your life. It's discipline, like you said, it's responsibility, and it does take work. But we're really thankful when he said that this morning. I was like, wow, I really don't look at that. I haven't looked at that as a thing, but it's true, and thank goodness that we've been there because of these choices that we've been trying to make for our
Yeah.
kids, for ourselves. But yeah, you as a parent really have to take the responsibility, take accountability for what your kids are seeing. And yeah, that's a big step for people.
Yeah, it's hard to control everything they see outside the house. Once they get to the point of they're on social media, and always consuming, what maybe coming home from the teacher may not always be the best nutrition education either. But at home, I mean, we can control that a little more, right? Like the words that come out of our body and the variety of foods that we have around for them to try. So, of course, we can't control our kids, but we can control, for the most part, our home environment.
Hmm. Yeah, and a good place to start
Yeah.
to set them up for healthy choices. And yeah, what a great conversation. I really appreciate that. What are some tips for parents to, once we've helped a child maybe maintain this healthy thing, how do we send them on their own? Like what is there a way we can say, okay, now you make dinners for the family? What are some ideas for having the kids kind of take control and be more responsible for the foods?
I love that idea. And as much as you can get your child involved, it's going to benefit them. They'll be more willing to try those foods. They'll take some pride and ownership in that. And then, of course, you're giving them valuable lifelong skills that they'll need one day, although lots of people are definitely missing. So I think it can be great to let maybe each child choose a dinner for the night, add it to the family menu plan, help to create that menu plan, and maybe once they're old enough to help you cook that or to cook it themselves. I don't do this as much as I should, but occasionally, I have a 16-year-old son will be like, "Hey, you get to make dinner tonight," and he has the ability to do it, and I know those are those are good skills for him to have. So it's great for kids to be involved, and even if they choose not to eat that food, if they're younger and picky, at least it's another exposure to it. So it all counts. It's another experience of touching, smelling, looking at the foods.
Mm. How much time in a day should we spend working on those skills with our kids?
Well, I think it depends. If you're homeschooling, you have more opportunities to do that. And then in the kitchen, you can bring in other math. It can be part of math. It can be, you can do science experiments with food. You can do so many kind of food play ideas. But at home, if you have, kids that are busy with activities, going to school, I know you don't have a lot of that time available to dedicate to teaching your child to cook. Now, actually, the schools up here have great options. They all have food classes. So I'd encourage my kids to take those classes, and the kids love it because they get to cook and then they get to eat that food that they made. But even, if you could try for once a week for getting the kids involved, I think that would be awesome.
Mm. And what do we do with our kids like at the grocery store? That's probably a great way to involve them too, to choose the foods that we're going to be cooking.
Yeah, absolutely. I love letting kids say, pick out a new vegetable to try this week because there's so many different things in the store that we probably haven't tried and are new. Once they're a little bit older, they can help you by filling things in the cart. Say, okay, go grab like an orange fruit for this week, or go grab, the yogurt you want. And then they get a little more autonomy in that too. So once they can become great helpers, life becomes a little bit easier compared to I remember the 2-year-old screaming in the car, not always pleasant.
Absolutely. Any of us who have been there know that.
Mhm.
That is the truth. Oh, that's so fantastic. So what are some um beverages that you find that are healthy for families? We talked about water. That's great. But what are some other things that maybe families can that or let's say do or don'ts? What are some things that they should not be drinking?
Yeah, well, there are so many drinks out there right now. It seems like the beverage market is just exploding. So I have no problems with like flavored soda water. We drink a lot of that. My kids drink milk with supper. I know milk is kind of a controversial topic right now, but I like to see some kind of milk or milk alternative that has calcium in it because kids do have high calcium needs and it is more challenging to meet that through just food. And something I've been buying a little more for my kids rather than pop is you can find like prebiotic drinks.
Mhm.
So they have very little sugar in there, but they have prebiotics or probiotics, which can actually, I wouldn't displace water with this, but occasionally it could be beneficial for their gut health. And I think we're still learning a lot about that, but our gut health is very important. And
Yeah.
now it seems crazy, but maybe you can drink a beverage in a can that might have some good bacteria in it, for example.
Yeah, it's great these days, right? What we have come up with so many different ways to do things and some of them
Mhm.
are okay tasting, you know. So but
Mhm.
it's
Agreed.
that's good. Yeah. You know, and we I think being able to expand those ideas of flavors and gives our kids different ideas that not just juice, like you said, not just the soda at home. Like there's different varieties we can try to make things fun and still be healthy. That those are good things to do for sure. So what about dessert time? Let's talk about healthy sweets. What are good sweets that we can give ourselves if we like breads and things like that? Like we shouldn't, but what are some good ideas to help with that?
Well, I love dark chocolate myself, so I have a little bit of dark chocolate every day for dessert. Of course, fruit is nature's candy. My kids love like cotton candy grapes. They taste like cotton candy,
They're
and if
so
you
good.
freeze grapes, I don't know, they almost become like sweeter tasting. So those are delicious. Or even like chocolate fondue or coating banana slices in chocolate and freezing them. So those are kind of some fun desserts where you're getting some nutrition as well. But like we talked about earlier, it's okay to have the regular cake or whatnot instead of totally limiting those things. But yeah, it is possible that desserts and sweets have some nutritional value too.
No, and I love those are wonderful ideas. I love those ideas to give families. We just got a dehydrator, so
Hmm.
we're looking forward to seeing kind of what we can create in doing those types of things. Give me some ideas for that. Like, what are some
Yeah.
good dehydrated foods?
Well, you can do homemade fruit roll-ups in your
Oh,
dehydrator. And once I had a huge batch of pears, so I just sliced up the pears and dehydrated them. And if your kid is picky or sensory sensitive, often they don't eat fresh fruit or vegetables because with every bite, it changes. Like
Yeah.
a blueberry, you think it kind of has a crunchy coating and it's mushy on the inside. So it's actually quite hard to handle sensory wise, whereas opposed to like a dried or frozen or even freeze dried produce, the texture is the same with every bite. So it can be easier for them to eat. And then a lot of kids like that chewy foods. So I think the dehydrator would be great for apples, pears, fruit roll-ups, things like that.
Good, good. I love those ideas. I'm excited to try some new
Yeah, good
things and
luck.
see what kind of new snacks we can get. Definitely. What is like an idea of let's do three good like meals that we can make for our family that cover all of the things that we should be eating for proper nutrition?
Yeah, good question. Making me think off the
I
top of
know,
my head.
right? And you don't
Let's
have to
see.
do three. You can do one.
Well, I always like to think of having, look at the food plate. We want to have, of course, a fruit and vegetable, some protein, some grain. And protein, of course, doesn't always have to be meat. Some families are vegetarian. Meat's very expensive now. So you can try things like, tofu, even if it's on a stir fry, beans, like a bean chili, something like that. And even if you have a really young one, a baby, like think of a chili as something they can eat. You can just put the little pieces on their tray and they can self-feed, be that baby-led wiener. But I love using my crock pot, Instant Pot for those one pot dishes, whether it's like chili or soup, because it's so easy. And I know veggies are often something that kids avoid, right? So in terms of serving vegetables with the meal that children like, I'm not opposed to dips at all. Like if they want to have veggies with dips, great. Roasting can bring out a little bit of sweetness.
Mhm.
So my kids will eat like Brussels sprouts roasted with maple syrup and butter on top of them, and they're actually
Ooh,
delicious.
wow,
They
maple
don't
syrup.
don't taste bitter anymore, right?
Oh, incredible.
So trying new methods of cooking, like even using a mandolin to make potato chips or beet chips, or cutting the vegetables in fry shape with ketchup is fine. So trying some of those new things with the veggies as part of your meal
Mm.
might help.
I love that. Those are wonderful ideas. And you have the one book. Do you have others that you've written? Tell us a little bit about that journey as an author and what you've been doing.
Sure. Yeah, I have. So, The Parent's Guide to Baby-Led Weaning, and another book, Baby Food in an Instant Pot, which I collaborated with the chef. So, she created all the
Love
recipes.
that.
And then I created the kind of how-to. Starting solids is the first half. And then in terms of picky eaters, so I haven't written any books in that regard, but I do have an online course and a group coaching program kind of for different ages, because
Yeah.
whether the child is younger than 6 or older than 6, at that age their brain changes and they're able to learn in different ways. So I have different, I guess, resources for picky eaters, parents of picky eaters at different stages too.
I love that. Where can we find that? Give us your website so we can know where to go and to find out all this wonderful information and help support you and you support all these families.
Sure. So my website is firststepnutrition.com, and there is a freebies tab there. So you can choose whether you're interested in my freebie for starting solids or younger picky eater, older picky eater. So you can go grab that info for free. And I also have a blog there where I probably have most of your questions about nutrition and feeding, feeding kids answered.
Wonderful. I love that. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's such an important thing that I think is rare. Is that weird? I mean, like it's so important, but there's not as I know a handful, less than a handful of dietitians and nutritionists than I do so many other things. So it is something that is really special that you um give this service to people and help them. And what are some positive things you've heard from parents and families on this journey?
Yeah. Well, that's one reason why I love working with families is just because I can see them going from this place of, real frustration and worry to making some changes. And sometimes it's just implementing that division of responsibility where the parents start to add a little bit of structure. They stop being a shorter cook. They start eating meals together and then trusting their child rather than trying to pressure them. For a lot of kids, even just those changes will totally, the families will flip a 180 and all of a sudden the child's eating more food, more variety. They're coming to the table happy. And everybody's just a lot less stressed and frustrated. So that's one, journey that I love taking families through.
Absolutely. Oh, I can imagine. That's great feedback to be able to get from people. And hopefully, the kids stay on these journeys for themselves and see the benefits that come from it. And maybe teach your children the risks that can come from making the other choices and some of the health risks and for your organs and your skin and all of the things that children worry about in their age groups. So something probably wise to teach them when it comes to why foods are important and why we're taking the time to make it an important decision.
Yeah, and teenagers will go through a period of rebellion as they always do, but I think, they'll come back to the cooking at home and eating the variety that they're raised with eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that. I see how that has happened.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's been so lovely to have you here today, and it's been a wonderful conversation, really informative and so helpful. Thank you so much. I'd love to stay in touch and have you back on if you have exciting new things in the future or just to kind of catch up on things we should be doing.
Awesome. That would be great. Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'd be happy to come on again and love chatting.
Thank you so much, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Sounds good. Bye, Sarah.